Greetings one and all, I am Don151.
And I'm Mekkah.
We are bringing to you Part 1, Chapters 8 and 9 of my Fire Emblem 10 Hard Mode 0% Gross playthrough, where we get to witness the ascension of Tormod into the Tor God. Chapter 1-8 is an idiosyncratic one, in which, once again, Mekkah finds herself in the role of having to rescue some NPC prisoners from the enemy, and in this case, instead of seizing a endpoint, she has to just kill every last one of the enemies. So this is a route map, but of the 12 units that we are allowed to deploy, 8 of them are forced into specific deployment positions, and it seems like the game wants us to route this map in a very particular way. Specifically, the Laguz Emancipation Alliance, Tormod, Morim, and Vika start in the south, Mekkah and Soth and 4 other freely deployed units start in the center. For whatever reason, Jill is not available to be deployed in this chapter. I guess the game developers thought that she would be too strong in this map, but our usual cast of Scrubs and Zhark and Ileana are still available for use. Finally, in the top left, we have Volug accompanied by 2 newcomers who are incredibly powerful.
These units are Nyla and Raphael. Nyla is extremely strong, being a Laguz Royal. If Morim was like Tyronio but as a Laguz, then Nyla is like Morim on steroids, with eternal transformation thanks to the form shift skill that lets her be transformed at all times. This lets her put her godly stats to use anytime she wants it. We will be putting them to use every chance that we get. She one-shots or one-rounds everything that she faces, basically. Raphael is less overwhelming, but still very powerful. He can vigor 4 people at the same time in a diamond around him, just like Dance of the Goddess from 3 houses and Engage. Not particularly useful in this map, but it will be very helpful in future maps to come. For Tormod's ascension to godhood, we do some strange things. Sure, we forge him a Fire Tome, which is expected with a boosted crit rate most notably, but also we took away Celerity and gave him Resolve instead, even though Tormod has to travel a lot in this map. That's a little strange. We also promoted Nolan, but considering how long this promotion has been available to us and how late we ended up doing it, you can probably guess that this is not going to be the most relevant promotion here, but it does help a little bit.
Chapter 1-8 is the first map since the prologue, and the last map in the game to feature enemy bandits as an enemy type. And these are some pretty strange enemies in the context of even Radiant Dawn. They have interesting properties. They take no movement penalty through thickets, but a really heavy movement penalty through swamp, so it takes a long time for them to reach the NPCs that they are programmed to chase after and kill. You might stereotypically think that they have high HP and attack, and they do at level 1, but for whatever reason, they have amongst the highest generic growths of all classes in the game, and most of their growths are focused in speed and defense. So these guys are now level 14 to 16, and they are extremely bulky as a result, and pretty fast. In fact, they're so fast that someone like Soth or Tormod with 20 speed has trouble doubling the higher leveled ones. So this is the reason why this chapter has one of the least lenient stat rolls in the game. It took me over an hour of resetting just to get 2 of the bandits to roll the stats that we need. Specifically, the bottom right bandit that Tormod has to face later on has to roll low enough magical bulk and low enough speed to be 2-shot and 1-rounded by him, and the bandit in the top right corner of the map has to have low enough physical bulk to be 4-shot by Zhark in a thicket with a Brave Sword.
A lot is happening on this enemy phase. First off, Raphael survived 2 attacks. He baited 2 mages over to the north so that next turn, Volug and Nyla can kill them, and then he can vigor for both of them without putting himself in danger on turn 2 enemy phase. Soth equipped the Shade skill so that the enemies will attack Zhark instead, and he gets more training in thanks to Paragon. Also, Mekkah is going to get a lot of use out of Tormod's Celerity skill. She will be able to use it to not just cure the damage that he took, but also the poison status that was inflicted. Lastly, you're probably familiar with the strategy to shove Tormod twice on turn 1 to put in range of a dracoknight. If that dracoknight doesn't suicide on turn 1 enemy phase, then he's going to move up and harass the civilians, and that way it'll be very hard for us to get to him as he's within the swamp. But what you're probably not familiar with is that you can shove him twice more to kill the enemy priests on the bottom right island, and he can start slaughtering enemies there.
Even though Torgod has a benefit of Resolve to boost his defensive capabilities and the Mega Forge to rain fire down upon his foes, this is one of the toughest enemy phases that we had to deal with in the entire run, with a pretty low chance of success, because he has to grind through 6 enemies, and all of them have pretty uncomfortable hit rates on him. Most of them have hit rates in the 60s, and they drop down to the 40s after Resolve is taken into account. Of note are the soldiers, who also 3-shot Tormod. The mages are kind of whatever, they do a bit less damage to him, but he really wants to dodge the soldiers. On top of all of that, he needs to get a fire critical on the boss, and without a class crit bonus, even with the max forge, the odds of that are not very high. Modeling enemy face combat in Radiant Dawn is pretty difficult. It's not straightforward like in GBA Fire Emblem or DS Fire Emblem because skills have to be taken into account, especially the skills that activate based on an HP threshold and which modify your combat stats, like Resolve. Because when in Resolve range, Tormod has a higher avoid and also a slightly higher crit rate. So in order to do this, I had to borrow a enemy face script that USS Gordon Captain wrote, and then teach myself a programming language to modify it in order for it to be useful in this scenario. But after all the numbers are crunched, it turns out that Tormod has just over a 10% chance to make it through this chapter, including the initial dracoknight, while also one-running the boss. And everything else is pretty reliable, so this is really the worst part that we have to deal with. There are ways to increase the chance of success if transfers were taken into account. So first of all, Tormod would be a lot bulkier with HP and defense transfers. On top of that, with speed transfers and luck transfers, he could be a little bit more dodgy. And with a little bit of extra magic, he would be able to use a Thunder Forge instead of the Fire Forge for a slightly higher crit rate. That's chapter 1-8, finished in 2 turns, and let's move on to one of the chapters of all time, part 1, chapter 9.
If you thought we were done with the early Dawn Brigade maps where we only have a couple of units under our control, think again, because in 1-9 we start with only Mekkah. This is the reason why we had to assign celerity to her at the start of 1-8, because in this prep menu, everyone but Mekkah is unavailable, and so we cannot unassign skills from, say, Tormod or Zehark or Soth. This kinda sucks, but what can you do? Of course, Mekkah alone is not sufficient to beat this chapter. We need the help of our newest unit, the Black Knight. The Black Knight is a former enemy general, but you might want to think of him as a Sith Lord instead because he deals in absolutes, as in every enemy he encounters has 0 damage on him, and he counters them with a 1-2 range Alondite that destroys absolutely every one of them, regardless of their class or weapon type. Of course, at 0% growth especially, Mekkah just needs to play hide and seek while the Black Knight runs around with his 6 move destroying enemies. He's hindered by 3 move every time he goes through a forest, but this is what we have to deal with. Supposedly the map objective is to kill the enemy boss, Jarrett, but he is nowhere to be seen, and that's not because of Fog of War. He will not appear until we've routed every enemy, and that's pretty tough to do because new ones appear almost every turn, all the way up until turn 10.
This clear is an adaptation of a very old and well-known strategy that predates even my potato quality Radiant Dawn run nearly 15 years ago. It does not require Mekkah to have celerity. In fact, the only reason she has celerity is that it allows her to reveal Jared 1 turn sooner than she would be able to otherwise. And that's the only feasible turn save that we can get in 0% growths. If we want to clear this chapter faster with growth rates, we need a pretty good Mekkah. If Mekkah has at least 14 speed, she can double enemies with Resolve and with enough magic, 1-round them. But if you really want to save all the possible turns, the fastest way to do this chapter with a hyper-rigged Mekkah with enough speed to double enemies naturally is to assign her the pass skill that we obtained in this chapter's base. I did briefly consider in 0% growths whether it was viable to try Mekkah with Wrath because it effectively triples her damage output with a critical. The problems are twofold. First, there's only one enemy in this map that doesn't just one-shot her even with the Seraph Robe, and that's the Myrmidon that we saw at the very beginning. The other problem is that even with a maxed Forge on her Light Tome, she doesn't meet the 3-shot attack benchmark for some of the enemies in this chapter, so that idea died pretty quickly. 1-9 is done in 7 turns, and join us next time for the exciting conclusion to part 1.
See ya!